Okay, well, really excited to have Dan here. I actually got to meet him at the International Rep Conference in Philmont in 2012, where I also got to um, get to know Joshua Dick, who presented to us, a few months ago as well. So that was a great conference. But when I asked Dan for an intro, he said, just check out my Wikipedia. It's like, oh, that's still way too much. We'll take up all the time talking about all of his accolades and accomplishments. But so Dan is serving as the current national chair of the BSA, and he had been a former member and vice chair of the World Scout Committee, as well as the BSA International Commissioner. He has been recognized for his tremendous contribution to scouting all over the world. He's received the Bronze Wolf Award. He's also a Silver Buffalo Distinguished Eagle Scout. As a member of the World Scout Committee, he really helped bring in some more management accountability for finance and governance, human resources in recent years, I've seen there's been a lot of growth. So I'm assuming that that's a lot to, seeing the fruits of those labors. Dan organized the pilot of the Inter-American Leadership Training in 2013, and is it the eighth one now, Dan, that just happened this year?
I think that's right, but they've had them all over the world.
Yeah. So I just follow the Inter-American one because it's ours, but that's cool to know that they're using that same model. That's awesome. Because anyway, this is allowing them, just to grow the youth leaders all over and seeing that international flavor there. So Dan is married to Allison, who's a PhD. She's a professor, isn't she?
Yeah, at the medical school.
Awesome. And anyway, so Dan, really glad that you're here. Appreciate you giving us the time, and turn that over to you.
Great. Thanks, Jared. Thanks for everyone for showing up on Mother's Day to hear me talk. And I was just going to tell you a little bit about myself for those that don't know me. In like my scouting career and how, a tremendous thing that I've gotten to do over the last 50 or 45 years, probably, with scouting. And it's kind of, I've got one more week as chair. And so next Sunday at this time, I think our meeting's at 7 o'clock. I'll be no longer chair. I'll be past chair. I mean, so I'll be in the past, but I've been kind of thinking through my scouting history, and I think it's a good story of where I've gotten to go with this. And let me kind of talk about that, and then we'll talk a little bit about the bankruptcy and kind of where we go, and then we'll have open questions. So anyone that wants to ask questions will be certainly to answer those questions. I was a Cub Scout. There's three things I remember about being a Cub Scout. One was I couldn't build a birdhouse. Number two is that my father still doesn't let me touch the Pinewood Derby car that he built, and it's in a display case on his shelf. And the third thing is I remember going to day camp. And the only thing I remember about day camp was 2 Dutch scouts cooking donuts. I don't know anything else, what other program we had, but we did have 2 Dutch scouts cooking donuts at our day camp. And I still remember that. And that was probably in the mid-70s, to give you a time frame. And so I quit Cub Scouts. We moved, and we moved to Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, a little suburb of Tulsa, out in the country. And I was riding on a bus, and it was bus 44. And I must have been 6th grade or so. And I remember behind me were the Gaspers, and Richard and Jeff Gasper. And I don't remember why. I don't know how I remember the names, but I remember Jeff and Richard Gasper asked me in the bus coming home from school if I wanted to join the Boy Scout troop there in the local community. And, you know, it took someone asking me, and it's a physical ask. Do you want to come to the Scout meeting? It's next Monday or Tuesday, whatever night it was, and become a member of the Boy Scouts of America. And that ask in the bus of 44, you know, coming home from school changed my life. That one thing. And I kind of gave this, I've been given this story lately, and I've been talking to lots of people, and someone came up to me the other day and said, you know, have you found Richard or Jeff Gasper? And, you know, and thanked them. And I haven't. I looked them up, and both of them have passed. And so I'm trying to get back to I've got a lead on a wife. And so I'm trying to go back and just let them know that their father, I think he has a daughter. One of them does have a daughter, and just let her know that, you know, her father made a big difference for me, and how important that was. After the 5th meeting of the Boy Scouts, our Scoutmaster didn't show up, and he showed up twice, and then he didn't show up for 4 times, I think. And so I was elected, because we couldn't get into the little building without him there. I was elected to call Scoutmaster Mike and fire him as a 6th grader. And so this was the start of my HR career in scouting, which I think continues. And so we got a new Scoutmaster, and I was lucky enough to spend, it was Larry Baylor out of Tulsa, or Broken Arrow also, and I got to spend Friday with him, and that should have probably been my lucky thing that I did this week. But I got to spend some time with him at the Indian Nations Council shooting sports. So I have a Scoutmaster, one of 2 Scoutmasters that are still alive. I had an incredible scouting career. I mean, I did, you got my Eagle Scout, served on 2 troops, senior patrol leader, did junior leader training, did summer camp, and went to Philmont. And Philmont was a big thing for me. We had moved to Tulsa, into the city. My Scoutmaster took groups every 2 years to Philmont. And I think that after going out there once, I went back out there for Rialto, and then I went out there and staffed for 2 summers as a ranger, and had incredible, you know, experience there. And I can remember internationally, I took out both a Japanese group from Osaka, Japan, maybe that's right, and a German group when I was a ranger at Philmont. And so that was another international exposure I had. I got out of school in the 90s, and I came to Houston, Texas, from Oklahoma, and didn't have a lot of friends. I had a lot of work going on, but didn't have a lot of friends. So I went down to the local church and joined the scouting group, Troop 266 in Houston, Texas. And they had a rule that you had to wear the neckerchief unless you had wood badge beads. So I immediately signed up for wood badge, and I got my wood badge beads, and that really changed my life, because it got me involved more than just at the troop level, but also at the council level. I got very involved with COPE, and I was the director for the COPE course here in Houston, and I really just you know, explored all kinds of stuff with scouting, and doing stuff with the I was the assistant scoutmaster of the older boy patrol, and we had a lot of great times. And this was in the 90s. Towards the end of the 90s, I was looking at the newspaper, the scouting newspaper, like we all used to get. You have to show that to young people, because they don't know what a newspaper is. But I signed up. I saw an ad there for World Jamboree in Chile. And since I had vast experience with international scouting, because of the two Dutch donut kids that had got me into, I remembered, I went to the World Jamboree in Chile, and it just changed my life. It really just opened my eyes, really, of what international was. I traveled a little bit as a kid, maybe to Europe once, but and maybe to Canada. But it opened my eyes to the vastness and the smallness of the world. And so I came back from that just stoked. Someone asked me if I was going to the national annual meeting, which was in New Orleans. And I said, "What's that?" And they said, "Well, that's where everyone meets, and there's an international committee meeting there." And I thought, well, I'll go to that. And I didn't register, which you're supposed to do. And I just showed up at the meeting, and I walked up to the door, and the guy in charge of the director of international for Boy Scouts America at that time was Scott Tier. And he basically said, "Where are you going? You're not in the international committee." And I said, "Well, I just wanted to listen." And he says, "Well, if you sit in the back and you don't say anything, I'll let you sit through the meeting." And so I sat in the back. I can do that. I can sit in the back and not say anything. And I sat in the back, and I noticed when I went in that about a third of the committee was not there because they were in the hospital or in hospice, maybe. About half the committee had wheelchairs and oxygen masks. And I kind of sat in the back, and I thought, if I just keep coming to this committee meeting, I could be on this committee, just because they're not going to be around long. And so I kept going. I got involved with jamborees, and got very involved with World Jamborees. Here in Houston, we brought in scouts from Georgia for about 6 years, the Republic of Georgia, and worked our summer camps. And that was very successful. Finally, they put me on the international committee and gave me an assignment, probably the best assignment I've ever had, which was be the head of Kandersteg, or the board member of Kandersteg from the US. And that got me 2 trips to Kandersteg every year, which was incredible. And something that I continue to go over there to see. I'm going back in June next month. It also, in 2008, probably 2007, I was very active in the World Jamboree. 2008, 9, they asked me to run for the World Scout Committee. And I really didn't know much I knew a little bit about World Scouting. I'd been doing it for about a decade now. But I really got engulfed at that time with the World Scouting. And I ran in 2011 in Korea at the conference for the World Scout Committee. And they elected 12 members at that time. Sorry, they elected 6 members at that time of a 12-person committee. And I was put on as the chairman of the finance committee. And I did that for 3 years. I also headed up the Human Rights Task Force, and probably the most thing I did, which probably made the biggest difference, we moved the headquarters from Geneva to Kuala Lumpur. And I helped hire and fire a secretary general. So I continued my practice of HR practices that I learned very early in my scouting career. The second term I ran, and I became vice chair of the World Scout Committee. We made a lot of accomplishments in cleaning up the organization and really just getting some eyes on dark spots around the government and financial structures of the company. And, a lot of people think of scouting as a, fun thing. But there's also the business part of it. And I was very involved in the business part of it, especially my second, third term, 3-year term. Let me say it right. And really, it was it had some great things. I traveled to over 100 countries with scouting. I've seen a lot of hotel rooms, but the scouts everywhere usually gave me one night at least to go out and see something in the country itself and see some sightseeing. But I was probably traveling 3 weekends a month, and being in Europe one weekend, being in South America or Central America or the Caribbean one weekend, and then Asia one weekend, and still keeping a full-time job. I'm not sure how I did that, but I did for 6 years. But I traveled a lot of miles, got to see a lot of incredible things across the world. And probably one of my only talents is that if you name a country, I can probably tell you something about scouting in that country. And so I was getting ready to come off the World Committee my last year. So it was my 5th year. And Roger Shrimp, who was our international commissioner at that time from Modesto, California, passed away suddenly. And I got a quick call that said, "You are now the new international commissioner and you're on the World Scout Committee." So I did double duty, being the international commissioner at that time also put me on the National Executive Board and the National Executive Committee. And we were restructuring everything. At that time, the National Executive Committee had about 24 people on it at that time, and we were restructuring it to have less people. So, and that's really where the control of the board of the BSA is held. And so the National Executive Committee in the new structure was going to go from 24 to 12. And I knew my spot was going to come off of that position. And I was fine with that because I had the World Jamboree coming up in 2019. I was the head of the contingent. And I got a call one day or an email one day from Bob Gates' assistant. Dr. Gates wanted to talk to me on Monday. And I said, okay, because you always say whatever he wants, you give him an okay. And I went to the office that weekend, I remember, and I wrote down a list, and I have it over here, and it has 3 things on it. And it basically said, thank him for the opportunity of, being on the National Executive Committee. I learned a lot. Second of all, I'm here for the kids, and if I can do about anything you want, but I'm here to give back. And so I got the call. I was talking to Dr. Gates, and he says, we'd like you to be the next president or chairman of the board of BSA, which was not what I was expecting the call to be at all. And so I did the right thing. I said, let me check with my wife and bargain with her. And I signed up for a 2-year term as starting in 2020, I guess, the chair of the Boy Scouts of America. If you think about my timing's not been very good on when to select to become the chair of the Boy Scouts of America. I had an incredible person in front of me was Jim Turley, great leader, great person. He helped us through a lot of times with Boy Scouts of America, did lots of things. But in 2020, if you remember, we had, beginning of it, we hired Roger, which was the first non-commissioned scout leader of our movement, which was not popular by a lot of our professional friends. We lost the LDS Church, as y'all remember, on January 1st. In February, we applied for bankruptcy. March, we hit COVID. And at the national annual meeting, I was elected. We froze the pension at that point, which is another wasn't an exciting deal. And then we went right in there to social unrest, as you remember, with George Floyd in my first week as chair. And then we had the Girl Scout litigation going on during that time, which was very controversial with our sister organization. And so it's been an exciting 3 years that I'll hand over to Brad Tilden. He's a great scouter from Seattle area. He is Eagle Scout, has I think 3 Eagle Scout brothers. He's been council president there. He's been on the bankruptcy task force with me. He's been the finance chair. And I think he's going to do a great job as the chair of the Boy Scouts of America starting next week. I think it's important, we've gone through the bankruptcy. Y'all probably heard more than you've ever wanted to know about the bankruptcy. We're done with bankruptcy. There's still some tail end appeal process that the other side can do, but we're not very involved in that. But just to kind of give you some thoughts around the bankruptcy, it was the most complex bankruptcy I've been told in U.S. history. You had, 84,000 claimants come forward with claims of sexual abuse. And I guess before we kind of talk about that piece of it, I think we need to talk about sexual abuse. It's something we need to talk about in all of our scouting, because it's not just the Catholic Church, it's not the Boy Scouts of America, it's not just in the United States, it's everywhere. And the statistic right now for the United States is 1 out of 6 boys are sexually abused before they're 18, which is a scary statistic. And the second piece is 1 out of 5, and I've heard even 1 out of 4 girls are sexually abused before they're 18. So these are terrible statistics, but there's something we need to repeat. We need to talk about, because we don't want any child, young person to get hurt in our program or anywhere. But these are not just in scouting, these are everywhere. I mean, this is across the United States. So scary, very scary statistics. Going back to the bankruptcy, 84,000 claims came in. We were dealing with 5,600 insurance policies, 80,000 chartered organizations with some liability, 250 councils, and each of them having, let's say, 50 board members that had to understand the bankruptcy. And we spent, the BSA spent close to $360 million just in the legal fees around the legal fees in the bankruptcy, because you pay for all the sides in the bankruptcy. So lots of 3 years of 3 years and 2 months of very hard work by lots of people to get us through that, both at the local council level and at the national level. And so, but we're out and we have a new starting point. We're a lot thinner than we were, which is okay. We probably need to lose some weight in some areas, but we are, much thinner, and we've got a clear path for the future. And that's kind of, I think the 3 things that I'd say that in our future, and then I'll open it up to questions. We've got to develop a safety culture. I think we all think of us being safe. We have a safety merit badge. I have a safety merit badge. I got it in 1983. But I don't think we have a safety culture within the BSA, and we need to improve that and constantly improve that. And that's something that's not like turning on a light switch. That's a continuous thing from now until infinity. So that's one thing. Number 2 is we got to grow. We have a great program. We lost a lot of membership during COVID. You know, we got down to, I think it was 700,000 kids, which is the lowest we'd had. It was the lowest number we've had since 1930s of kids in scouting. So we've got to grow. Last year we had 2.5% growth. We had 180 councils grow. I think this year we'll have better growth than that. I think everyone's geared to growth, and they're focused on growth. We're not into building new camps. We're not into building new buildings. We're all, you know, board members are focused. Everyone, Scout executives, our professionals are focused. Everything's focused on growth. So that's good. And then I think the third thing is accountability. And, you know, we have a unique organization. Have you ever tried to explain the Boy Scouts of America to a non-Boy Scout? I know we all have, and we can't do it. We don't have an elevator speech, first of all, and it's hard to explain, you know, what our organization does. We all know it because we're in it, but we've got to be better at accountability, and that, you know, that's, you know, our accountability to the kids, our accountability in our districts or our councils, our accountability as board members, our accountability as, you know, as just members of the scouting organization. How do we do better? And so those are kind of some things. That's a little bit about me. I want to open it up for questions, give you all some time. I know it's a recorded session, so if I'm coy on anything, it's something probably I don't want out there in the open. If y'all, and y'all, I'm sure y'all understand that. I get enough arrows as it is.
Sounds good. So we have about 4 or 5 minutes for questions, and then we'll close the meeting. And if people can stay around, we can do that. But who has the first question?
This isn't a question, just a comment. Congrats on keeping your hair through all of that, Dan.
Yeah, that did seem to be quite a bit when you listed it all. I mean, I was a leader going through it, but it was just kind of like, okay, here's this thing, now there's this other thing. But I guess when you list it all out, it was like, no wonder we were all so tired that year. It was all just like right in a row.
It really was.
I got a question.
Sure, Mike.
Go ahead.
Hey, Dan, you know, we do a lot of first aid training and wilderness first aid training in Scouts. We don't do any mental health first aid training. And you mentioned the ratio of sexual abuse, which is appalling. And of course, that leaves some scars, right, that don't get addressed. And just briefly, I have 10 Scouts went off to NC State, or they're now 3 young ladies and 7 young men. And they've had 7 suicides there, most in the engineering department, a couple drug overdoses. One was an Eagle Scout from our area. Another one was a friend of one of my Scouts from church. And, you know, that's kind of the tip of the iceberg. Obviously, there is a mental health crisis, and we seem to be an organization that really could address that. Has there been any thought about training not only our leaders, but our Scouts and how to be resilient, and also just to take care of themselves, but also how to look out and advocate for good health for their peers?
It's a great question, Mike. We've had a couple of suicides, and it's, you know, being in my position, I get to see all the bad things, you know, that happen. And this is a real good timely question, because I can remember things, because we just had a discussion on this on Tuesday or Wednesday of last week. We had all the high adventure base leadership on a phone call, talk about safety in the upcoming year, summer. And Philmont, they picked 4 subjects, and each of them took a subject. So each of the high adventure bases, and Philmont took their subject was mental health, in fact. And they've let me just tell you a couple of things, you know, and Philmont's the pinnacle. And if we get it right there, hopefully it flows down into other pieces of the organization. But I'm pulling up their slide presentation, and this may sound a little bit discorded, but I want to make sure. They've got a working relationship with their local and county health departments that all the high adventure bases do. And they share resources. Philmont actually has someone, a volunteer that's a past scouter that comes in twice a week to help with mental health cases, which I was really impressed with. They have that resource. I mean, not a lot of camps have that. They've gotten to where the staff, you know, we have 1,000 staff members, probably 1,100 probably at Philmont, but they're now able to use the 1-800 number of employees that we have a mental health, you know, dial-in deal, and they're not only can they use it, but they're also letting people know how to use it.
Awesome.
So it's not just having a number there; it's telling them before they start camp that they can use that. And they're talking about mental health. And I think they've got about an hour training for each person, each staffer that they're working on. Let me just flipping through the slide real quick. They're going to do a listening ear for those that were at the thing. They're going to start doing a listening ear kind of concept. Yeah, Luke Arnold is the guy that's the therapist and school counselor that's coming in. And then there's a mental health first aid USA course, and it's about an 8-hour course, I've been told. Yeah. And so, you know, it's something that, you know, they're going to send some people to that. There's both an adult and a youth version of that. And so we're going to start sending some people to that and just try to see if there's something we can do. So we're at the beginning stages of it. Mike, great timely question, you know, and something that we really need to take on, because, you know, the last thing any of us want is a youth to get hurt or have mental struggles, especially in the scouting program.
And I'll share, I actually started that program 4 years ago here in my council. I started it as a scout leader, and there's an national organization called NAMI, and they're the ones that do put on the youth. They put on the youth mental health first aid program, and there's also a peer-to-peer program. But each state has a chapter of NAMI. You can reach out to them and get the grant money to have that training put on. I did it 3 years ago with 30 leaders. I actually had leaders come from out of council to do it. I'm working on having it done again, probably this fall here. But if you just reach out to them, they have the grant money to help you put on that training. Is otherwise, if you can do it online, but it ranges from anywhere from $75 to $200 per person to take the training. So
we're offering it for 80 scouts in it, but there's a backlog of almost a year to run people through now.
Yeah, it just depends on each state and how many trainers they have. In Georgia, unfortunately, they don't have a lot of organizations reaching out to them right now to do that. So I've been able to get the stuff done pretty quickly. But I also created programs that I do at the unit level. I'm formally Green Cross certified. I haven't done that in a lot of years. And then I did youth mental health first aid. And I have smaller programs that I do because I have a son that has mental health issues. He's on the autism spectrum. I have a lot of youth that are on the autism spectrum. And so this was something I started seeing when he was in 3rd grade. And so I started with the Cub level of smaller things. I actually found some resources online to teach at each grade level. And I do that with my youth at the unit level. And it's some days we do a little bit better than others, but you know, a lot of it, especially since I have a female unit, as you do, Mike, you know that our females tend to overstress a little bit more at this age group than the boys do. So it's something that we're actually funny enough, the materials are sitting behind my laptop at this meeting right now, because it's something I'm going to be doing the next 2 weeks at my unit.
We have great opportunities as an organization to take the lead and set the pace for the rest of the country.
Very important subject that, you know, we've talked a lot about at the national level, and trying to find what resources and how we can implement those out into the field. Other questions?
Nicholas, just so you know, I did mute you because you had some wind background. So if you wanted to add something, you'll have to unmute.
Sounds good. Thank you.
I have a question.
Sure.
So I grew up in exploring in the 70s, which was big back then. It kind of faded away a little bit. I have noticed that when I went to the World Jamboree, there seems to be in the international realm programs for older scouts, such as rovering. Do you see anything like that happening in our country?
Yeah, I think we're going to see some pilot programs on that. Scott Sorrells, our national commissioner, is working on and has the team working on that, and do some pilot programs throughout some councils on that, and try to get that 18 to 26-year-old. And I'm not sure if that's the exact age, but I think there's some work being done, or I know there's work being done on it. And I think they're going to try to do some test cases, pilot programs out there on that, starting fairly soon. You know, we really, during the bankruptcy, we really froze all program just because we needed to focus on the bankruptcy. And I think everyone understands that. But now, you know, we've got a new Cub Scout, some new Cub Scout stuff coming out. I think many people I've talked to that have really looked at it, I have not. Are excited about it, and when people, I've not heard anything negative, so that's always a good sign, because I usually am the first one to hear stuff that's negative. And so, but you know, I think we're going to see some an older older young person program, if that made any sense, coming out, you know, and piloted.
Thank you.
And just let me give you, Pat, I know that you said that there's a lot of internationals that do that, you know, and some of them have been successful in it and some of them haven't. So, you know, it's a mixed bag out there. But what you're also seeing is a lot of programs across the country or the world, you know, they really have, you know, once you become 18, you become the troop leader of that group. Especially in Europe. And so, you know, their leadership is a lot younger than ours because of that. And so.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and close the meeting. I'm stop recording and then I'll close the meeting. And then